Thanks for joining this session. I understand that this session is supposed to provide us with information on the cashew and rice sectors. I also understand that the audience is journalists who are looking to understand these two sectors more and then be able to report adequately on the issues that concern the sector. I am Nunana Addo, like Gilbert earlier mentioned, and I lead the policy advisory team within the GIZ MOVE program. And we'll understand what MOVE is in a couple of seconds. So, Gilbert, please, if you could support me in putting up the presentation, I'd be grateful. I'll briefly talk about the program on which I work. So it's a development program implemented by the German Development Corporation, otherwise known as the GIZ. It's a regional development program that works on cashew and rice value chains in 6 countries. So currently we work in Ghana, Sierra Leone, Senegal, Nigeria, Burkina Faso, and Cote d'Ivoire. We are a program that is financed or funded by the German Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development and also co-funded by the European Union and the OACPS, or the Organization of African, Caribbean and Pacific States, as well as the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Now, this project is actually a merger of 2 programs that existed separately until 2021. We started as a joint program in 2022, and we have funding for the next 5 years to work on the 2 value chains that I have mentioned. Now, what do we work on as a development program? We work in 5 areas or around 5 pillars. The first one being increasing the share of value addition to both cashew and rice in the region, in the countries in which we work. The second being working towards enhancing the viability of production.
A minute. Can you see my screen now?
Okay, please give me a minute. Yes, but it's really tiny. Okay, but then it's fine. I think if the audience can see it, that's okay. It appears you are projecting from a phone screen, so it's really tiny. Okay,
Yeah, I'm projecting for a phone.
okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
If the audience is okay with it, then we can go ahead. I'm okay with that.
Okay.
Okay, so let's move to the third slide. That's where I am. Okay, so as I was saying, we work on value addition to rice and cashew. So we support small and medium enterprises in the countries in which we are present to add value, to be competitive, and also to be profitable to their owners. So we do that in different ways through business development support. We also work through our policy support wing to promote or to try to advocate for an enabling environment for these businesses to thrive in. We also build the capacities of business owners on diverse topics that has to do with or that have to do with the success of their businesses. So that ranges from technical and specific topics, you know, to cashew or to rice, but also on how to develop business proposals and the like, all these other things that go into helping them make their businesses profitable. Then another thing that we work on as a project is capacity building, and that's one of the most extensive wings that we work on. And that has to do with trainings, but also facilitating exchange visits when necessary, bringing in the necessary expertise for the value chain actors and also policymakers so that they can better understand the sector and then contribute to its growth or development. 2 other areas in which we work is on production, making production systems viable, of course, in the face of climate change, to see how we can promote the adoption and understanding of climate smart practices or climate smart agriculture, both by rice farmers and cashew farmers. Then we also, after we have helped these MSMEs to make their companies competitive, we also help them to access markets, but also to develop the regional market for the products that they are producing. So that's just an overview of what we do as a project. And I believe PN Africa will share this presentation with each of you so you can look in more detail at some of the services that we offer as a development program. So on the next slide, I give a bit of an overview of what this presentation seeks to communicate. We'll look at what the global cashew industry looks like, what the trends and new developments are regarding this particular industry. What does sector organization look like? And what are some of the regulatory measures that have been taken so far to guide the sector, but also to help its growth? And of course, the challenges that the sector still encounters that should be addressed if we want to reap more out of this particular cash crop called cashew. Now, this presentation is divided into two parts. I'll be tackling the part on cashew, and my colleague on the call, who would introduce himself when the time comes, Nunana Addo, will take up the presentation on the rice sector. So when we move on to the next slide, in green on the African map demonstrated or shown on your screen currently is the countries that cashew is currently produced in Africa. Now, Africa is the main source of raw cashew nuts in the world today, with Cote d'Ivoire leading with over 1 million metric tons production. Aside that, we also produce about 60% of the world's cashews. So currently, there's about 5 million metric tons of cashew produced worldwide annually. As at last year, 2024, we had about 5 million metric tons of cashew being produced. Now, out of this 5 million metric tons, 60% of that comes from Africa alone, with about 50% coming from the West African sub-region. And the good thing is that cashew consumption is growing year on year. So it's not a case of maybe producing and not finding markets for what we are producing within the region. So as you can see on your screen, there's a 7% annual growth in the demand for cashews. And so there's market for this particular cash crop. So let's move on to the next slide. Now, that's a sector that actually accrues several benefits when it comes to social circles, when it comes to the economic gains that one can make from a cash crop. So, because then when you take the cashew value chain right from production through value addition to the trade or market part, a good number of youth and women are employed in these segments. And so it's a crop that when invested in would, accrue several benefits, both economically and socially for the producing countries involved. The next slide shows or gives us an overview of global production as at end of 2023, early 2024. Now we have listed the top 10 countries that are producing cashews. When you look through the list, you realize that out of the countries that we have over there, only two of them or only three of them are outside Africa. That's India, Cambodia, and then Vietnam. The rest are African countries, which means that this is a crop that holds true potential for Africa if we invest in it. Moving on. We also try to look at the share that each of these regions or countries hold when it comes to cashew production. You would see from the pie chart on your left that West Africa alone has a 50% share. East Africa holds about 8% share. And then the rest is distributed between Asian countries like Vietnam, Cambodia, Indonesia, Thailand, and then India. And of course, Brazil, which has been the source of this particular nut, holds a very small amount as at now. That's about 2.7% of total global production. Now, what does this go to tell us? We've observed from data gathered that cashew production has more than or has just about tripled since 2006, taken between 2006 and then 2023. Essentially, there's demand for the crop, and so its production keeps increasing. But one thing that is worthy of note on this particular slide is Cambodia's growth. Now, between 2018 and 2022 alone, which covers a period of about 4 to 5 years, Cambodia, Cambodia's production has grown very significantly. So then, by last year, Cambodia was producing about 700,000 tons of cashew annually. Why is this something that is of concern? And would understand this like, as we go further into this particular presentation. Cambodia has the right variety, or they've researched extensively. They've been able to come up with a variety that produces a significant amount per hectare. So, whereas Africa is currently doing about 700 kilograms per hectare on a good day to about 900 kilograms per hectare, and with certain outliers of about 1 ton per hectare. Cambodia's production currently stands at about 1.4 tons per hectare because of this particular material that they are using. And Cambodia is also very close to the markets where cashews, are popular, or where cashews are the most bought, and that's Vietnam. Now, Africa is producing the largest part as at now, but then with the growth rate of Cambodia, if Africa does not invest in the cashew sector, then Cambodia can easily overtake it. And because of proximity to markets, it might have certain negative or dire consequences for us as producing countries that are further away from the market, and would understand this better as we go. Moving on to the next slide. It goes to make the point that despite being the major source of cashews currently, Africa still earns less than about 3 times less than it should from the cash crop. Why is that so? So when you take the picture on your left, you see that all the arrows are as in for raw cashew nuts, and whenever you see RCN in this presentation, it's raw cashew nuts. You see that the arrows for raw cashew nuts are moving from the West African sub-region to Asia, particularly to India and Vietnam. But then on the right side, the image there shows that kernels or processed cashews, that's value added products, are moving from the Asian region to all parts of the world, or different parts of the world. And none at all is moving from the West African sub-region or from Africa to anywhere. What does that mean? It means we are still exporting more raw nuts than processed cashews or kernels. It means we are exporting RCN instead of kernels. We are not adding value to what we are producing. And so if we are exporting that, then we are earning much, much less than we would have if we had processed, or at least semi-processed. Now, Vietnam and India are the main destinations of our RCN, but then they are main exporters of the kernels, which means that all the money that we could have made, all the jobs that we could have created locally are actually being exported. Now, on the third point, we talk about raw cashew nuts traveling longer distances. And that is because Vietnam buys from Africa. The raw cashew nut is gone, like it's taken to Vietnam, processed, and then it travels back to the European and then the US markets. And we'll talk in a bit about why this is a concern in today's world that is very concerned with traceability and then climate change or carbon emissions and all that. Let's move on to the next slide. Now, value addition in Africa is increasing. It's not at zero or negligible levels as it used to be. You see from the graph on your left that between 2015 and 2022, that cashew processing is increasing in Africa. However, more still needs to be done, and would understand why on the next slide. But before we move to the next slide, there's a list of countries on the right, the table on the right, That shows us what the established processing units are and then how many of those are operational. So with the exception of Togo that processes very small volumes, all the other countries show a good number of processing units established, cashew processing units or factories established, and yet a lower number of these processing units being operational. This is due to a number of reasons. One is that some of or most of the processing units don't get enough material to process or to operate all year round or to even meet the needs of the factory. So if for example we have some of the factories that have about 15,000 metric ton capacity, they are processing at like less than half of what they are able or that they have the capacity to process. So then they are processing maybe about 3,000 to 5,000 tons per annum, which means that they are not operating efficiently. They are under, utilizing the capacity that they have. Another thing is about the price of the raw material. They are not able to compete against what we have come to term, foreign buyers, for want of a better term. So the Vietnamese and the Indians, because they have better conditions, better policies backing them, for example, come into some of these countries and are able to outprice the local processors. They are able to buy the raw material and export them, whereas the local processors are not able to even access financing to be able to buy the produce that they need and stock up for all year round processing. These are but a few of the reasons for which these factories all these factories are not operating or at full capacity. In Nigeria, for example, there's also the challenge of energy, right? That they don't have constant lights or electricity to be able to operate as they should. So there are a good number of reasons why this is not happening. But then it all goes to show that there's more support that is needed if we are to successfully add value to our cashews. Next slide, please. So this particular slide also shows us about the value addition in the various countries. So on your left, you see some of the countries in which our program operates. So we are able to get data from these countries because we support some of the data collection by some of our partners in these countries. So we see the installed capacities in each of these countries, the amount of volumes processed, and then the total production volumes that they have in those countries. In each of the cases, you see that the installed capacities are far higher than the actually utilized capacities. And even worse is that the national production levels are way higher than what is eventually processed in country. On your right, you also see the percentage of crop processed um, as regards like or in relation to the installed capacities in those countries. All these just go to further buttress the point that there are capacities, there's raw material in the countries. If regulation works right or if support to the sectors work right, then we'll be able to add value. So we have all the conditions that are necessary to boost value addition in these countries, but then support is needed, especially when it comes to regulatory schemes and then incentives. Moving on. So we noticed that with the relatively smaller amount of processing that is ongoing in cashew, in the African cashew producing countries, they are still gaining ground when it comes to the various markets or the target market. So on your left, you see the share of the market that African processors have in Europe. So what we observed in 2023, for example, was that African processors were gaining more market share on the European market. And on the right side, the US market as well, we saw that there was a gradual increase in the share that African processors have on the US market. Essentially to say that if we are able to support value addition, we wouldn't have a problem accessing the markets. Of course, with the introduction of the EUDR, or the EU deforestation regulation, and then the other regulatory measures, or regulations or directives that have to do with the European market, for example. They are talking about shorter supply chains, the need for shorter supply chains that are traceable, the need for us to contribute less and less to, environmental challenges, carbon emissions, and the like. And averagely, it takes about 18 days for shipments to move from the West African coast to Europe, whereas it takes about 45 to 60 days for the same product to travel from Africa to Asia and then back to these markets. So, of course, if we have traceable products, we have processing at origin or at source, then of course we are more appealing and attractive to the markets that we are targeting, and we have a better, advantage or competitive advantage as compared to the or in relation to Vietnam and then our Asian counterparts. Let's move on. Now, in spite of the huge amount of production that we have, and then or in addition to the huge amount of production that we have, and then the less processing levels that we have the challenge of not consuming cashews enough in the various countries that are producing cashews. So you see that we have a huge share when it comes to production. We have a bit of a share when it comes to processing, but when it comes to consumption, we don't even feature at all. India is currently the highest consumer of cashews, then followed by Europe, and then North America, and then China, and then the Middle East, for example. But Africa falls among others. This poses a problem because then we should be able to increase domestic consumption. We should be able to diversify our markets. We cannot keep concentrating only on the current international markets that we have for cashews. Now, the trends that are driving consumption of cashews and its byproducts on the international market are health. There are more health conscious consumers now, and so these people would rather go for plant-based diets. And cashews are one of the healthiest nuts, according to several research works done. It doesn't have any cholesterol, and it's good for people who are trying to lose weight. But aside that, there are a lot of heart healthy nutrients or components in cashews as well. So essentially, health conscious consumers are going more and more, or are being steered more and more in the direction of consuming cashews. There's also the innovation when it comes to the product coming from cashew. There's also taste and texture that influences to a very large extent the purchase of cashews. And then there are the issues of sustainability and environmental friendliness of the product as well. These are all things that currently influence the consumption of cashews. Moving on. The cashew sector has also developed quite significantly over the past 10 years from our then data and then observation. One of such things, or such areas, is the development of improved planting material. I mentioned earlier that this is one of the accounting factors for Cambodia's success. But the good thing is that in Ghana and then in Tanzania, for example, there's a huge advancement on cashew research. So in Ghana, the Cocoa Research Institute of Ghana is the institution that works extensively on research related issues when it comes to cashew, and so with Tanzania. And they have been able to help, the continent in um, coming up with improved planting materials, improved varieties, climate smart, production modules, but also highly pest and then disease resistant planting materials, which they have been able to share with countries like Benin, Togo, and other interested countries. So this helps to increase the yield, the pest and disease resistance of cashews, and then it's the qualities that are looked for in the market in terms of peelability and other more technical details when it comes to cashews. So essentially, this is a good thing because then with these advancements in research, we can increase our production of cashews. Another interesting thing is that processing is increasing over the period of value addition, especially in Cote d'Ivoire. So currently, Cote d'Ivoire processes at least 25% of its 1 million tons that it's producing when it comes to cashews. And Benin, for example, has also introduced a total export ban of cashews. So essentially, we see that there are some proactive measures. They've established industrial zones in the various countries as well to attract investments in the cashew sector, to attract investors into cashew processing and the like. So we realize that governments are no longer so aloof or unconcerned about the sector, that there are certain measures that are being taken when it comes to incentivizing and then also regulating the sector for its growth. Another thing that we have observed is also that there's an increased sector organization, both in country and on regional levels. So in the various countries, we see processors associations, producer associations, interprofessional bodies that brings um, these various associations under one umbrella so that then they can have, one face towards the government and advocate for more favorable measures to be taken concerning the sector, and also facilitate learning between the various segments, but also on the regional level between the various countries. And some of these associations are the African Cashew Alliance, that is more geared towards the private sector. And then on the government side, the Consultative International Cashew Council, that brings together the ministers of agric and then the ministers of trade and industry or commerce, depending on the country concerned, so that they can dialogue and then be able to come up with policies or measures that are beneficial to their countries or mutually beneficial to them. Another thing is also that we've observed that a good number of development partners like ourselves are more and more interested in the cashew sector or supporting the sector because of its employment creation potential, revenue generation potential for local populations, which is usually our main concern. And there's a certain level of cooperation between these development partners so that we don't replicate one another's efforts. Another key thing is the establishment of information platforms and knowledge sharing platforms, which most of the development partners are trying to support platforms like the CICC, that's the Consultative International Cashew Council, to establish so that information is available for decision making on the levels of various governments. Now, moving on, we've seen so we see that regarding sector organization and regulation as well, like I mentioned, there's a certain level of regulation or incentive provision to push the sector forward or stakeholders, businesses forward. So in Nigeria, we see that there's no dedicated regulatory authority, but then the ministry, that's the Federal Ministry of Agric and Food Security, the Cocoa Research Institute of Nigeria, and then the Nigerian Export Promotion Council, for example, are institutions that are tasked with different aspects of the sector. So the Federal Ministry of Agric and Food Security concerns itself with production-related issues, and of course works with CRIN, that's the Cocoa Research Institute of Nigeria, on research-related topics that concern the sector. Nigerian Export Promotion Council, as the name suggests, concerns itself more with exports, training the stakeholders, especially the exporters, on quality related and international market standards, like topics around those, so that then their produce are acceptable or accepted on the international market. Then we have the NCAN, that's the Nigerian Cashew Association, also that represents the stakeholders in the sector, that's the private sector. But we also have the CAPAN, for example, that's the Cashew Processors and Packagers Association of Nigeria, that represents the processors in there. But then they also are subsumed and or work with the NCAN hand in hand to promote measures or to promote or to do advocacy for the sector. Now, when it comes to policy measures, there are no specific policy measures for the cashew sector yet. We understand that they are working currently on developing a policy for the cashew sector. However, for now, other more general measures like a 5-year tax holiday for new processors, duty-free import of cashew processing equipment, and then no RCN export tax are some of the things that go to support the cashew sector one way or the other. And so you see some of these, you see across the countries displayed on your screen, the RCN or raw cashew nut export taxes. In Benin, for example, there's a total ban of exports. There are also some levies at like certain points, but there's also a few tax holidays that generally concern agribusinesses in these countries that benefit the cashew sector, but no real policy for the cashew sector, except of course for Burkina Faso, that as you can see on this particular slide. But then let's focus more on Cote d'Ivoire, that is on the next slide, because then they have put in a lot of effort into regulating the sector. So currently, there's a dedicated authority, that's the Cotton and Cashew Council. That's in French, Le Conseil du Coton et de l'Anacarde, that's CCA, as you can see on your screen, that concerns itself with the regulation and development of the cashew sector. And so it is a well-resourced authority supported by the government or established by the government to oversee the affairs of the cashew sector, and the results of which we currently see, because the Cote d'Ivoire or the Ivorian cashew sector is one of the best regulated currently in the industry worldwide. And then, of course, the private sector also has the processors associations, the producers associations, the traders and exporters associations, for example, that come together under the umbrella of what you see on your screen as IFA-CE, that's the interprofessional body. So then they usually will dialogue with the CCA, or the CCA does a lot of stakeholder consultation to be able to inform the measures that they introduce concerning the sector. And I outlined that some of the things that Cote d'Ivoire has done to help the sector. There's a complete road export on raw cashew nuts. There's an export tax on raw cashew nuts that leaves the port of Cote d'Ivoire. Part of this money that is taken in export taxes is reinvested into the sector through tax incentives for kernel exporters, for example, processors. They also try to reserve at the beginning of the season, they try to buy about 15% of the crop and store them in warehouses for processors who do not have the money readily available to buy raw cashew nuts at the beginning of the season, so that then they can help them, they don't shut down or they don't end up, operating at much lower capacities than they should. They also register the various stakeholders in the sector so that then they can keep track of what the volumes are, who is exporting from where and to where. And all these things go to, refine the measures that they have introduced to, or that they introduce to help the sector grow. There's also the setting of minimum farm gate prices so that then farmers do not get cheated, or that they don't, raw cashew nuts are not bought at lower prices that they should, so that farmers are not disincentivized, or they are not discouraged in producing more cashew. Then they've also set up a fund to support research work, research and development, scientific research particularly, so that then they can continue to improve on their production levels. Essentially, this is to show that Cote d'Ivoire has taken the pains to invest in, regulating the authority, resourcing its regulatory authority well, has seen the results, or has been able to see good results. Moving on, there are also regional and international level institutions that um, concern themselves with sector organization in the cashew sector. One of such is the African Cashew Alliance, which brings together private sector actors in the cashew sector. It organizes different information sessions for them. It also plays an advocacy role on behalf of processors and other, value chain actors towards the governments of the countries concerned, but also towards the CICC, which is more of an international body that brings together ministers from the various member countries. Now, the CICC, that's the Consultative International Cashew Council, is also a body that brings together, like I mentioned earlier, ministers of agriculture and ministers of trade, industry, and commerce in the various countries. Currently, there are 11 member countries, and they are, of course, working to get other countries involved. Essentially, this platform has been created to facilitate dialogue and cooperation between member countries or between producing countries so that one country is not making a decision that negatively affect another producing country, but also so that then the interests of various stakeholders are well communicated to policymakers or policy influencers for the benefit of the sector. Then we also have the research network, that's radar, which was also created to bring scientists and researchers together so that they can share knowledge with one another, but also see how they work together to reduce the incidence of pests and diseases and other factors that could negatively impact on cashew production in Africa. Moving on, some of these challenges I've already touched on, but just to run through a bit, one of the main challenges that we have in the cashew sector currently is the low level of value addition. Evidently, that have explained quite extensively in the previous slides. There's also no reliable database for decision making. So currently, information or data is very, very segmented. So at the country level, you might be able to find information with development partners like ourselves that support some of these countries. We are able to get access to some of these data or to fund studies and research work or surveys to be able to collect that data. But there's no real data base that you can readily go to and then find information on the sector. And this is something that, if worked on, will go a long way to help decision making concerning the sector, because then decision making will be better informed, with facts and not, just copying and pasting something that has worked elsewhere. But then we'll be able to make contextual decisions that augur well for the sectors concerned in the various countries. Then there's also very little investment in research and development in the various countries. The benefits of investing in this we have seen in Cote d'Ivoire and also in Ghana, because in Ghana, for example, productivity of cashew plantations is quite advanced, and it is in Ghana that we find outliers of about 1 ton per hectare being produced, whereas in other countries we still have lower productions as low as 400 kilograms per hectare. So if we invest more in research, scientific research, but also new product development, this would also help the sector greatly. Then there's the challenge of access to finance that confronts each of the segments, be it producers or processors, and even in some cases, traders and exporters as well. So this is another thing that, if addressed, should help the sector. Then there's the challenge of infrastructure challenges or concerns as well, roads, but also electricity, equipment import and the like, and availability of equipment for processing and the like. Then, if we were to try to increase production, for example, one issue that has to be addressed would be land availability for cashew production. The good thing about cashew is that it can be intercropped. And so, if we plant more cashews, we would still not have to deal with the challenge of food security or anything, because then these trees can still be intercropped to, like with food crops and the like. However, there's very There are also challenges when it comes to land access, especially by women and youth, for them to be able to go into cashew production. And one of the main challenges that we are observing could become a problem within the next decade is that our farmers in cashew are aging. Right now, the average age of cashew farmer is about 52, between 52 and 54. And this is across the board. It's not only in Ghana, not in only in Cote d'Ivoire or Senegal, it's across board. So if we do not put in measures to encourage the youth, for example, to go into cashew production, then this is a cash crop that we could potentially start losing, revenue from within the next decade or more. Now, why should we invest in the cashew sector? One is that it's because it promotes or it actually presents a lot of socioeconomic opportunities. You see on the screen from the graphs that between 2015 and 2021, jobs created both in production and then in processing more than doubled, at least in the countries in which we intervene as a program. This was data that we collected together with our partners that we worked with, especially the Ministry of Agric. We observed that more jobs were created along the entire value chain. So if we invested or if we supported the sector better, we would have more jobs created, especially for women and youth. Now, when you move on to the next slide, we also try to show you this is from research that we did in consultation with stakeholders in our intervention countries. That if we export 1 metric ton of raw cashew nuts, the amount we get is between 600 and 1,250 US dollars. But if we exported about 1 metric ton of processed cashew nuts, would accrue about 6,000 to 8,000 US dollars. Look at the difference in the amount that is earned simply by adding value. Now, if we're to process or to add 5,000 metric tons, factories or processing facility, that would create about 1,125 extra jobs. So essentially, this is something worth investing in. This is a sector worth investing in, a crop worth considering when it comes to, pushing for employment of local populations and then revenue generation and foreign exchange. Also, this is something that we should be considering. Now, on the next slide, why should we process in Africa? And I touched on this quite extensively in my earlier explanation, so then I'll just run through. For example, with the EUDR and the new regulations that are being introduced on the European market and even soon on the US market, although they don't touch cashew just yet, there's a high likelihood that it would soon touch this particular cash crop. So if we're to process in Africa, considering the traveling distance and the possibility of processing at source and creating dignified, jobs for our local populations and the like, would very easily check the or tick the boxes when it comes to the EUDR and other regulations and what the market is looking out for. This is the reason why we should do that. There'll be shorter and direct traceable chains. There'll be economic growth, but also a reduced carbon footprint, among other benefits. Let's move on. There's another. We've spoken so much, quite extensively about the kernels, but then the cashew apple, what most of us refer to as the cashew fruit, that's the soft part of the cashew fruit, either red or yellow, can also be used for a good number of things, and that's what you see on your screen: juices, brandy, wine, vinegar, but also industrial ethanol, pomade, among other things. And then for the cashew shell as well, it's also not waste, or it's not something that should be wasted either. There's a fluid in the cashew nut shell that we call the cashew nut shell liquid that is used extensively in the paint industry and in other industries as well. And then after the oil is pressed out, what is left is actually compressed into what we call briquettes, and that are used in industries, as a more efficient energy source for powering machines. So essentially, the entire cashew fruit is very useful. Secondly, the apple processing um, is relatively cheaper or relatively less capital intensive when we compare that to the kernel processing as well. And this is something that can easily be invested into for the rural communities in which cashew is usually produced. This is something that can like easily serve as a job creation or employment creation avenue for the populations concerned. Okay, when it comes to climate change as well, cashew is actually a crop to invest in. So you see that we had a study done, or a study was conducted by SIAT a couple of years ago, and it shows that the areas that are currently suitable for cocoa would become less and less suitable for cocoa and more suitable for cashew. Essentially, if we are losing ground for, or if cocoa being a cash crop is losing ground currently, the good thing is that cashew, which is also a crop that is largely produced and has the ideal conditions to do well in African countries, would be gaining ground, or would also have the conditions to do well or to thrive. Now, another thing is that there are farmers, for example, in Benin that are earning money from using their cashew plantations as this thing, carbon basins, so to say. And so then they're earning carbon money from carbon credits, selling carbon credits as well. So that's another source of money. Aside the fact that cashew is a hardy tree and easily withstands some of the effects of climate change that we are currently experiencing, that's another way in which we can earn revenue from cashew. Moving on to the next slide. So, what should we do, knowing all that we know currently? If countries were to commit to regulating the sector better, to investing in research, pushing for increased domestic consumption, capacity building, and then supporting value addition, for example, through various incentives, then we'll be making much more than we are making from the sector. And another thing is for us to facilitate, or for the concerned stakeholders to also facilitate access to finance, and then capitalize on this commodity as one that we can easily use or take advantage of the ECOWAS trade liberalization scheme, and then other regional related and continental related policies or trade schemes that would be helpful to the producing countries concerned. So the next slide just talks about some of the things that we use, or some of the tools that we employ as a program to intervene in the cashew sector. But then I wouldn't go into this, since you'll be getting the presentation slides so that I can look more closely at them. Of course, if you have any questions, you can always go through Gilbert or PN Africa to get to us. So I would end here for now and invite my colleague to take up the rice part, and then maybe after we can invite questions or comments. So, Issa, please, you can take it up from here. Thank you. Okay. Gilbert, please, can you support Issa? He can't unmute. Hello,
Okay.
Cynthia. Okay.
Yeah. So I think can I be heard now?
Yes.
Then I hope we can run past the time that has been allotted here because it's almost 1 hour. It's almost 1 hour before I talk about starting.
Yeah, I presume you can. I think Gilbert has a bit of a challenge with unmuting. So please go ahead. I think if there's anything you would be
Okay.
notified. Thank you.
Okay. So on the right, Nunana has spoken a lot about the overview of the MOVE project. She's also spoken about generally on the cashew sector. I think I will try to summarize a bit on the rice sector and the key important areas that I would put much emphasis on. So maybe in terms of an overview, rice, I prefer to always call it a domestic crop. Domestic because everybody knows rice since inception. Everybody has eaten rice in one way or another in the past. And lately it's become more of a political crop because every government talks about rice, trying to use rice to sort of improve upon their local economy. And so it's become more of a political crop. So generally, it's a stable crop, which is produced worldwide. But if you look at in terms of production, 90% is grown in Asia. The rest are scattered across the globe. So it's more of a strategic crop, which can be treated as a cash crop and which can also be treated as a food crop, depending on which lens you are looking at it. So in brief, I will say that there have been a number of rice varieties that are in the globe. Some of them are changing into a more impressive form. Others are developing into a more different strains. So now we have the miracle rice, which I think mostly is what we consume as food. Some would have different scientific name for it. So rice is presumably a crop that serves as a source of income and employment for millions of households. You can talk about 20 million and counting. So generally, that is the overview. So we'll look at rice production in the context of the globe, then we'll try to narrow it down to where we find ourselves and what has informed our decision to also be discussing rice today. So we'll look at rice in the context of production. Next slide. So as you might be aware, as at last growing year, about 522, roughly 523 million metric tons of rice was produced globally by about 100 countries. In Africa, we are one of the fastest growing continents in terms of production. But if you just oppose that in terms of consumption, we only have about 54% that we are able to produce locally for our consumption, just 54%. In other literature, you would have it get close to around 60, but depending on where you get your source of information, that should not vary a bit more. So if you look at the global production, about 90% of what is grown globally can be found in around 10, 11 major countries. You can talk about China, that is leading with around 28% of the world production. You have India, that is around 26%. You have Bangladesh, around 7%. You have Vietnam, 5%, Thailand, Philippines. And these are countries that I think we import a lot from. So generally, rice is cultivated in Europe, North and South America, Africa, and Australia. You can find small bits of rice cultivations in different parts of the world. This data is sourced from the USDA Foreign Agriculture Services. That's why when you have Forster data, you have a bit of slight differences, but that doesn't really account so much. So now let's look at rice processing and consumption. Around 480 million metric tons of milled rice is produced annually. This comes from India, Thailand, the big players that I've mentioned. They produce it annually. China and India alone can account for around 50%, because if you look at China, it's around 28%. India is also around 26%. So roughly it's a little over 50% that rice is grown and consumed in the world. In Africa, some countries are doing pretty well. So for example, Nigeria is able to produce around 8.5 million metric tons, followed by Egypt, that does around 58 million metric tons, and then Madagascar around 4.6 million metric tons. So these are one of the world heaviest, African heaviest producers in terms of rice. They also contribute in one way or the other to ensuring high production across Africa. Next slide. So look at global rice trade dynamics and importation levels of rice to Africa. So if you look at, for example, Thailand, they are able to export almost 10 million tons of rice. They are able to export almost 10 million tons. These figures might go slightly higher because these are 2018 figures. And so the share of the global rice trade is around 28%. And then the volume of export out of the 10 million they produce, the volume of export is half, around 5 million metric tons. So that tells you that half of what they produce in Thailand ends up in Africa. If you look generally also in India, they try to produce same around 10 million, which is around 29% of global share. But generally, they are just giving us a little bit of 1/3 of what they are able to produce that is sent to Africa. So it tells you where the heaviest rice is coming from the African to the African continent. You have Thailand, you have India, you have Pakistan, you have China, a bit of Vietnam, you know. So those are areas where we have heavy imports of rice into the African continent. US gives us a bit, but not so much in terms of the volumes. Okay, so this is just a snapshot of what we need to understand if we want to assess where the rice is coming from and what is influencing it and what is their share in terms of their global rice trade. You know, what is their share in terms of global rice trade? So the bigger giants are just Thailand and India, and then you also have others. You also have others who are doing their bit. But you also realize that China produces a lot, but their share of global trade is around 5.4%. What does this tell us? It tells us that they consume also a lot. You know, they consume a lot. So that is why their share of global trade it's a bit lower compared to Thailand that focuses more on the export market. So let's look a bit into the challenges in the African continent. What are some of the challenges of the rice sector? The challenges are known to most of us. Access to finance is one of the key challenges, both for production and also for processing. You know, so finance is a key challenge that a lot of governments are battling with. Development agencies are also trying to figure out what would be a good financing mechanism to be able to support the subsector. Then we also have poor quality paddy from farmers. This is one of the challenge, but arguably this can be resolved if we try to improve upon technical related trainings to be able to produce quality paddy, as well as also coupled with good quality input that would translate into good paddy production for farmers to use. We also have weak local marketing systems, especially in terms of distribution. Markets across Africa are a bit fragmented. You don't get the linkages in terms of the different levels of markets. And so that is also not supporting the value chain in terms of at the level of market systems. So we also have limited access to credit and higher tax rates of importing processing machine into the country. You will recall that processing machines are a bit more expensive in some of the countries to import. We really don't have import tariff regimes that allows for equipment to be imported at 0 tariff rates. And so this is also contributing to not industrializing most of our agriculture sector, particularly in terms of the processing area. There's also influx of cheap foreign rice in the African continent. Most of the rice, when you go to the different markets, you see a lot of brands. Some of them are quite produced cheaply, and some of them have been stored over a longer gestation period, and they are dumped in the African market. So this one are some of the challenges that local producers are battling with in order to be able to compete effectively. We also have packaging materials, the cost of it, for you to be able to attract the market, you also need good packaging. Some of the materials are quite expensive for our local processors to afford. Then one of the niche market of rice is the parboiled rice. To be able to do good parboiling, you need good parboiling vessels. That would help you to produce good parboiled rice. Parboiling vessels are quite expensive. Right now, if you need a parboiling vessel that can contain around 500 kilogram, you should be thinking of something of around 5,000 USD. That tells you how much you will have to contend with if you have to parboil and further do processing. Nonetheless, there are potentials and opportunities in the rice sector. We will explore the potentials and challenges. And opportunities. Some of the potentials are precision agriculture, or what we call precision farming. If we employ precision farming, we are able to optimize the use of farm inputs, optimize the use of water. We are also able to reduce fertilizer use and pesticides use. Then generally, we can increase overall crop yields. And then we have real-time data on soil health and crop conditions, all attributable to precision farming. Then one important area that we also have to bear in mind is that there are systems of production. We can talk about sustainable rice production. We can also talk about systems of rice intensification. These are two broad areas that seeks to adopt water-saving mechanisms and also the use of drip irrigation technologies to be able to produce rice efficiently and also mitigate effects of climate change. So these are systems that we have to preach. And for us as a project, we emphasize so much on sustainable rice production because it encompasses a bit so much on resilience, building resilience of smallholder rice producers. More importantly, the sector also holds potential to empowering marginalized groups. For example, women. If you look across the rice value chain, women play a very dominant role. I've mentioned one area, that is in the area of parboiling. Women play a dominant role in that area. When you also look at marketing, women play a dominant role, and sometimes some aspect of production, transplanting, these are key areas. Women play a dominant role. So we can use this value chain to sort of improve the sustainability of the marginalized groups in terms of jobs. Then we can also talk about other opportunities that are unbound for us to tap into. We can clearly remember the African Continental Free Trade Area, where it creates a lot of market opportunities for us to explore and be able to build markets for the rice value chain. Then we can go ahead to look at interventions or strategies that are adopted by some rice producing countries that in a way seeks to enhance or boost rice production. We have already mentioned Nigeria as one of the biggest countries, or one of the countries that are large in terms of their production. They produce around 8.5 million metric tons. But if you look at that production target or the production volumes they are able to achieve, it all boils down to a number of government intervention areas or mechanisms that government put in place, successive governments of Nigeria, of the Republic of Nigeria, that has enabled them to be able to achieve this far. They are around 75% self-sufficient. And then these were the measures the Central Bank of Ghana decided to, through what they call the Anchor Borrower Scheme, decided to support the commercial banks at an interest rate less than 10%, to also on lend to rice producers at a quite reformed program that seeks to have a market-driven approach where the smallholder rice producers are connected to market. And so they were able to access funding from the central bank and this enabled them to be able to scale production. This led to the development of a lot of paddy rice in Nigeria. And so they had to announce an import ban of rice. If you could remember, somewhere around 2020, around 2020 up to around 2021 up to 2023 thereof, they announced an import ban because they felt they were almost through with self-sufficiency in terms of rice production. But different governments have come and they have reversed the trend currently. They've reversed it because they think that the policy, different governments have different policies. The policy is also having a negative consequence on their food inflation. And so this current government have decided to open the doors to allow for more import into the country. And so that measure of the current government is also leading to a lot of closure of the rice mills, a lot of staff layoff, a lot of competition with foreign imports. And so the local industry is getting relatively uncompetitive compared to just a year and a half ago. So these are just the pictures we can paint of one classical example of Nigeria. Inconsistent policies leading to a decline in terms of self-sufficiency and in terms of building local capacity. So another example is that of Ghana. Ghana that, as you might be aware, are around 43% self-sufficiency. You know, we are unable to feed ourselves to the tune of somewhere around 47%. This is complemented by imports, typical import from Vietnam, China. Also, you can talk about the other countries. But there was a number of initiatives government undertook that brought us this far. Past and present governments have also done their bit, but if you might be aware, there was Planting for Food and Jobs initiative by the past government, and it opened a lot of doors to be able to scale productivity. This included input credit, machinery services, capacity building through the public sector staff. This therefore led to a lot of interest in food crop production, also including rice. And therefore, government's objective at that time was to see how they could do that to be able to improve upon production and ban imports. You know, there were also measures that government took along the line to also ban exports of paddy rice across the borders. And this was aimed at boosting domestic supply so that the foreign imports are a bit not competitive with the local ones. But currently, as we speak, we have new government in place. We really do not, we are yet to study what the government modalities or programs would be that would seek to either align or discontinue some of the policies that have been done by past government. Now let's look at some adopted, some of the interventions or strategies that have been adopted by a rice producing country regionally. regionally. So at the level of ECOWAS, there have been a broader collaboration with governments and non-governmental agencies to try to also see how best they can support the different governments to be able to achieve rice self-sufficiency and not typically depend on imports. This I mentioned earlier is a political crop. And so if you are able to achieve self-sufficiency, you save a lot on import bills by the different governments. And so we have the national rice development strategies that is also supported by Coalition of Africa Rice Development, funded typically by JICA. It has a very similar approach across all the countries. They call it the rice approach. I don't want to bore you with so much of the acronyms, but the rice approach is uniform across, but you tailor that approach towards your national strategy. And so we have the national rice development strategies that each country relies upon to work towards achieving self-sufficiency. Usually, these strategies are developed in collaboration with both the public sector, the private sector, and development agencies. We also have the ECOWAS Rice Offensive Strategy. The ECOWAS Rice Offensive Strategy, as you might be aware, was launched around 2014 with the objective of ensuring that all African countries reach self-sufficiency by 2030. Currently, the offensive strategy is being pursued rigorously by the ECOWAS Rice Observatory. And so measures are being done to review the current strategy and to see how best they can extend that to be able to meet rice self-sufficiency. Then you can talk about other regional policies. We have the ECOWAS Rice Trade Liberalization Scheme. We also have the AFTAC that I've mentioned, the African Continental Free Trade Area. All of them are aimed at boosting inter and intra-regional trade within the continent. And this would go a long way to be able to help in rice trade, because in some countries, we have self-sufficiency achieved, in other countries, close to achieving, and in other countries, they are still far behind. But if we facilitate trade among the different respective countries, we will be able to balance up the deficiencies in some of the countries that need support. Let's look at strategies that can be adopted to boosting the rice sector. A number of strategies are available and that can be adopted by different governments to achieving rice self-sufficiency. Among them include provision of mechanization services to farmers. This would ensure timely provision of mechanized services, and its attendant effect would be to produce on time, take advantage of favorable weather condition, and also to increase yield. The second advantage is continuous research on different topics in the rice value chain. There are a lot of topics that have been worked upon, but much more needs to be done. One, in terms of policy environment, how to harmonize different policies across the ECOWAS region. Another area that is of concern is the irrigation facilities that are scattered across Africa, developed by in partnership with donors and also impact investors. So here, this irrigation facility, some of them are getting obsolete. And then there is a need to rehabilitate them to be able to reach maximum capacity. Largely with the irrigation schemes, they are able to produce 2 times a year. Some are able to produce 3 times a year. And if we have a lot of that, we will be reaching self-sufficiency, not heavily reliant on rainfall. There's also the provision of financial services and credit to actors. Financial services are sort of an engine to facilitate growth of the sector. And so this is an area that we have to push very strongly. Then one cannot talk about yield productivity without talking about seed. Farmers need certified seed that is high yielding to be able to grow and then to achieve maximum yield. We also have to look at adoption of good practices. Good agriculture practices would therefore boost productivity and yield, and it will also ensure sustainability of our production systems. Government should also be more deeply involved in providing subsidies. Farm level subsidies are also important to increasing productivity and making the sector more competitive, because if you compare us to the developed countries where most of the imported rice is coming from, they have subsidy arrangement in place. And so we need to learn good lessons from them. Then tax exemptions on agriculture equipment. I mentioned about equipment earlier. We need to really we need to push for policies that would facilitate exemptions of tax on agriculture machinery and processing equipment. This would go a long way to help us to be able to reach self-sufficiency. Then overall, let's look at what MOVE has worked through and our approaches to supporting the value chain. We have done that with Merchant Grant Fund. This is a tool that has supported the private sector to be able to build sustainable relationship with producer groups. And complemented with that has also been ensuring processing efficiency. And so that is one of a classical tool that the MOVE project uses to be able to grow the private sector. We also have contract farming initiative. Contract farming arrangement is something that we have pursued vigorously. Contract farming is just a system where you build sustainable business relationship between producer groups and then processors. That way, you leave them with lasting relationship that both parties benefit in terms of raw material and also in terms of input and extension provision services from the processor. We also have the Rice Miller Business Training Program or initiative. This is a modular program that is developed by the MOVE project, 5 modular courses that addresses key aspects of the rice value chain. We have a model that looks at how to build sustainable relationship between the producer and the processor, which we call developing profitable farmer services. We also have models that addresses marketing, practical marketing. We have models that looks at finance essentials, helping processors to be finance ready and to develop further their cash flows. We have models that looks at milling operations. We do that with Beulah. That helps us to be able to ensure proficiency in processing. There are other marketing development packages that we deploy to support our processes. We also have the regional and national rice platform. We call it the ECOWAS Rice Observatory National Chapters. We have so far 6 being established. We have 1 established in Burkina Faso, Nigeria, Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, Sierra Leone. We have the last one being in the process of being established in Senegal. So we also have the Farmer Business School. The Farmer Business School typically is one of our key instruments that we use to build entrepreneurial capacity of farmers or producer groups. This one, the farmer sees his or her production as a business and sees him or herself as an entrepreneur rather than a way of life. Then the last tool that we employ largely is Sustainable Rice Production Initiative. This one, I touched a bit on it. We want to look at production systems to be more holistic, looking at it in the lens of sustainability, with the 3 thematic areas of sustainability: the economic, the social, and the environmental. So this model is structured to address the 3 thematic areas of sustainability. I think I've spent quite some time. I bring my presentation to an end. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much to Nunana and then to Issa for that elaborate presentation. Colleagues, as we usually do, if you have a question, raise your hand and then we will call you. I've seen Marvin's hand up. So Cynthia, kindly unmute, give Marvin the opportunity to speak. Cynthia, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. That's been worked on. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so Melvin, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Not so, just a reaction, an applause reaction. So,
Hello, Melvin. Okay, I can see that Melvin is muted now. And you can also type your question in the chat box, and then we will read it out to our two facilitators. Yeah, colleagues, so we are waiting for any question for Nunana or Isa. Okay, so it looks like we don't have any question for Nunana and Isa for their presentation. So that then would bring us to the end of today's presentation. And let me, on behalf of Parliamentary Network Africa and also the African Parliamentary Press Network, say a big thank you to Nunana and Isa for availing themselves for today's presentation. If there are any questions that maybe participants send to us later on, share with you for your comment and for your answers. So on that note, let me see, I think I've seen some hands up. Priscilla. Okay, so Cynthia, kindly allow Priscilla to ask a question.
Okay, so Priscilla was just reacting. It is not an indication that she wanted to speak.
Oh, okay, okay. Okay, so then on that note, we brings today's session to an end, and we reconvene next week on the 5th of March with a presentation from Janine Lazarus. As usual, we'll advertise it on our various social media handles and also on the platform. So thank you all for joining, and we are grateful to have you. So it's bye from here.